The other thing I wanted to mention really quickly about Trump is this idea that he's not interested in UFOs is complete baloney. His uncle was named John Trump. He was a theoretical physicist, and he was hired by Dr. Vannevar Bush, who was a founding member of MJ-12, to do what? Guess what? He's the guy who went in and dug up all of Nikola Tesla's papers in his apartment and went through all of them and decided what's classified and what's not classified. So don't kid yourself that he didn't put his favorite nephew on his knee one day and tell him all about the aliens and everything that he knew. So there's a big game being played. As David said, there's smoke and mirrors, there's a game being played. We're really watching a civil war in the United States, and part of that civil war is who's going to disclose first and how are they going to define what the disclosure is? How are we going to define who and what the aliens are? Now, there is a document, or the header of a document, that has been released by WikiLeaks, who I will remind you has a 100% record of accuracy, that says that there was a U.S. military base on the moon that was nuked by the Soviet Union in 1979. And all we have so far is the header, the metadata, the person that declassified the document in 2012, and I know Clyde Lewis and some other people are trying to get a Freedom of Information Act to get at that document, but some government out there says there was a secret US base on the moon in 79. It was nuked by the Russians. I imagine when Ronald Reagan took over, they put a stop to that kind of stuff. But there is some evidence that there was at least one secret base on the moon, probably based on the Project Horizon technology that has come out. And it seems logical to follow up with what everybody else says, that there probably is a secret base on there, another one that was built after that. Presumably after we came to an agreement with the Russians, they aren't going to blow up our bases anymore.
It was about 3 years ago, and that John Burroughs and I were doing Phenomena Radio on KGRA, and one of the people that we interviewed was Lynn Buchanan, who was one of the controlled remote viewers in Project Stargate back in the end of the 80s. And he had made connection with one of his old managers and administrators out of Project Stargate, and came to learn and told us on the air that his manager from Stargate was now in charge of interstellar trade routes at the National Security Agency, and that we had been operating international or interstellar trade routes since at least the 1970s. That supports some of the stories from whistleblowers that we have had a secret base on the moon since at least the 1970s as well.
Obviously, the stuff on the moon they don't want us to see. I've seen some of the photos, and I'll admit it's really interesting because there are structures up there I cannot explain. You got the arch, you got the tower, you got the thing looks like a Enterprise from Star Trek, been slid in, dirt thrown up around it, and call it a moon base. I have no idea what those things are, but like crop circles, which y'all do have, they warrant serious investigation and looking.
This morning I gave you a presentation about this concept that Hoagland came up with back in '94 of these glass structures towering over the lunar surface, which were basically built as a meteor shield. And again, those things are there. I showed you the colors, how the light hits the glass and the prismatic effects bends the light and creates all these exotic colors on the surface of the moon, which NASA has whitewashed out for years. And so all that's happening, in my opinion, is that the sunlight is hitting these panes of glass or crystal or whatever they are at a certain specific angle, and it's bouncing back to the camera or the observer, and that's what people are seeing and what they've seen for hundreds and hundreds of years. There's reports going all the way back. It's not outgassing. It's just the simplest explanation is that it's this glass stuff that we see in all kinds of photographs of the lunar surface. So that's what I think people are seeing.
Spartan 1 has seen photographs of the base on the moon that's on the dark side, and it is a base that is controlled and operated, he says, by non-humans, and goes into the interior of the moon. I also have other whistleblower sources that have worked on programs in which they have either been involved with getting equipment on alleged shuttle flights or flights up to the ISS, and they insist that we have used the International Space Station as a cover for launches that are actually going to the moon and getting to the backside. This ties into a different kind of technology that the man who is at the National Security Agency on the 8th floor working in Cyber Command in charge of interstellar trade routes says that since the early 70s, we have had the ability to work with an extraterrestrial group on interstellar trade, and that our biggest goal is to get rare metals, and that we have been getting a supply through interstellar trade. And what we give them is back-engineered technology that we have made from retrievals. So suddenly is this picture that the moon is like a new Walmart. You've got non-humans using it, you've got humans using it, and soon there will be humans from the Earth in many nations that are going to be fighting about who will be in the Shackleton crater getting the most sun energy from that South Pole. And that if you look 10 years ahead, and David, I'd be curious if you felt the same way, the moon and Mars are going to be part of our 6 o'clock news.
Where I was 50 years ago today, I was leaning back against Viola Armstrong's knees. That's Neil's mother. I was in their house in Wapakoneta, Ohio, and the 7 Mercury astronauts were laying on the floor in front of me. And when Neil was sleeping in the lunar module on the moon, I was sleeping in his childhood bed. I am a member of the family. You have Viola Armstrong was my surrogate mother. That's kind of a blockbuster laid on you, but I can't let this whole opportunity go by and not say something. I know so much personal stuff about the Armstrongs you wouldn't believe it. How did that happen? That to make such statements, and it seems incredulous me sitting here telling you this. I've lived with this every day of my life for the last 45 years. I asked Neil the question. We were sitting in the kitchen, his mother's kitchen. He was looking out the breakfast window. And I asked him, I said, Neil, did you run into anybody up there? And Neil was an Eagle Scout. It's really hard to become an Eagle Scout. Neil was last of the Boy Scouts. He would never lie. So he didn't want to lie to me, so he stared out the window, and it's a look on his face, and I've known him for years. So the look on his face was, he didn't want to lie, so what he said was, there are things we're going to find out later, and that's all he said. But that was enough for me. Something happened up there. He ran into something, what, I don't know. But it was enough to really alter his life. Viola was worried about it because that wasn't the son that came back from the moon, that was one that went to the moon. So she even knew something happened, but didn't allude to what. So that's, yeah, they are doctoring the photos. They are hiding something up there. What, I don't know, but let's go find out. How about that?
So we had a lot of resources and contacts, and one of the goals that I had was to interview as many astronauts as possible who may have seen something unusual in their stories. And at the top of my list was Neil Armstrong. And what I was so puzzled by is that when I started what was easy with other astronauts, Pete McDivitt answered the phone at his home, and we were able to do an interview with him and with others. But to get to Neil Armstrong, it was 2 weeks in, and I was becoming very, it was almost like urgent. We have to find out why it is that we cannot get in touch with the man who made history of stepping on the moon. And that led to a pilot who Neil Armstrong had known in his late teens when he began working toward becoming a pilot. And I had a dinner meeting with this pilot who said, remember the big ticker tape parade in New York after Neil Armstrong had stepped onto the moon? He said, well, I called. I've been his friends for a long time. And the Neil that answered the phone was not the Neil that I remembered. His voice sounded down, and I was so confused because now he was the most famous person on the planet. And he was invited over, and he said when he got there, the lights in the house were nearly off or just dim. His old buddy was not effusive. They went into the living room, said Neil Armstrong sunk down, slumping into a sofa, and mentioned to the pilot, "Why don't you sit there?" And he said, I looked at Neil, my old friend, and I said, "What is wrong?" And he said this old buddy that he is just getting there and hadn't seen for quite a while is not even looking at his eyes and is looking down at the floor when he says, "Remember when that last 15 seconds and we're coming down in the lander and NASA made an announcement to the public, everyone heard it? There are rocks and they're going to turn the lander and you see dust come up." And the pilot was saying to me, Neil explained, he put his hand out and he said, "We were looking at 3 huge silver discs on the rim of the crater, and it would have been broadcast straight to the world." And the whole rest of the discussion, he said, which was not very long, boiled down to Neil Armstrong telling him that night, his old buddy, "I'm not going to go out into this world with a chain around my neck and lie." And that, as far as I know, is a true story about a human being who did something that seems beyond extraordinary. And yet his own existence on the earth after he returned, as most people know, was he basically disappeared. Except for a very few pieces, he disappeared. And I think that that pilot gave me an insight. And David, I don't know if you have another insight.
I do. I didn't know, I never heard anything about the 3 silver discs, but that doesn't mean they wasn't talking about it. But Neil went through a horrible time when he came back. And just a few months after he got back, he divorced his wife. I was there when the divorce went on. It was ugly, very hurtful to him. And where he went after that, he went to South Dakota to the oil fields with his brother, and they ran oil well derricks, and they sold out in the 80s right before the bust. They made a lot of money. Neil came back, and then he went to Lebanon, Ohio, and taught physics at the University of Cincinnati till he retired out. But to show you how vastly private Neil is, Neil sued his barber because his barber was taking clippings from his hair and selling them. And so he sued him not to do that. That's how intensely private this family was. So that's why he disappeared, because he just offered his brother. But you know, you pointed something out that just made me remember. Before he went to the moon, he had the prettiest eyes you ever seen, like Paul Newman. When he came back, he was always staring down. And I forgot that until you said it.
And William Mills Tompkins, who died about 18 months ago, at 93 or 94 or 95, I've forgotten, but he had worked with Bob Wood on 1 or 2 books having to do with what he described as a career working with the Navy and doing scale models of varying kinds of UFO craft. And William Mills Tompkins, in a 5-hour interview recorded with me, and I think I've only done 3 5-hour interviews in my entire professional career, William Mills Tompkins told me, independent, I had not talked to him about Neil Armstrong or this story that I just told you. William Mills Tompkins said, and after Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, he said, I was shown in the office where I worked the 3 silver discs lined up that we did take photographs of that were just hidden by the turn and the dust, and that they were 3, and he said, about the size of football fields, and that matches what the pilot told me that Neil Armstrong told him.
there were a number of major cataclysms in the solar system in the fairly, it could have been 100,000 years ago, or it could have been millions of years ago. But clearly there was once a planet that orbited about where Mars orbits now, because you can look at Mars itself and you can see that it has two massive tidal bulges. And the only way you get a tidal bulge like that is if you're in an orbital lock relationship with a bigger planet, like the way the moon is with Earth, where it always shows the same face. So that is a clear indication that Mars was locked into this big planet. Dr. Tom Van Flandern called it Planet V or Planet 5. Other people call it Maldek or Phaeton or different names like that. There was another planet where the asteroid belt is now. They were these super Earths. As we look around other solar systems, we see that they have these super Earths, which is something between a gas giant and a rocky terrestrial planet like the Earth. They're about twice the size of Earth. They're about 5 times as massive, and they are very, very tectonically unstable. So either they were blown up or they blew up, but they bombarded the entire inner solar system with all this incredible debris from these explosions. Now, if you look at Mars, you can clearly see one hemisphere is completely spattered with so many craters you can't even count them. The other side is basically smooth because that was the side that was facing this planet when it exploded or when it was blown up. You look at Venus. Venus has a massive scar about a third of the way around the planet. So I think Venus was an Earth-like world before, until this giant piece of something hit it at 43,000 miles an hour, ripped through the core of the planet. All this volcanic activity started, vaporized the oceans, and created this atmospheric hell that exists, sulfuric hell that exists on Venus now. And the same thing happened to the moon, because you see, I showed you the pictures of these glass structures, and there are parts of them that have these huge holes in them where they've just been battered through by some sort of debris. So I basically, as you look all around the solar system, including the Earth, you see these massive impacts, the ones that killed the dinosaurs, which the scientists tell us were 65 million years ago, but it might have been 65 million years ago. The truth is, when scientists, these guys date things, they date them based on crater counts, because they assume that in the far distant past, there was a lot more debris around that could collide with stuff. But if that's not true, if planets can explode, then the crater counts are useless in terms of dating. So truth is, we don't really know when these things took place, but I think clearly whatever civilization or civilizations were on the moon, and I think there were at least 3 or 4 epochs of, because there's stuff high up, there's stuff down below, there's stuff underneath, there's all these different civilizations that were probably there. Yeah, they were caught up in one of these several cataclysms, and honestly, they may have been natural disasters or they may have been wars, and we just don't know.
There was an experiment done when Neil put the packages out on the moon. There was about 7 different instruments altogether. One was a solar wind that could measure the solar winds. Another was a micrometeor impact device. Another was a pyramid of little mirrors, which is the thing that we use to fire lasers to the moon and back. So if we didn't go to the moon, how come we kept those mirrors up there? I can give you a phone number to 3 different observatories that fire a laser every single day to the moon, and it bounces back off of those mirrors so we can get measurements. And we were up there. And one of the instruments they put down, they didn't put them on all 6 landing sites. I think 4 of the landing sites got it, but Neil's was the first. It was a seismograph. Pushes the rods down the ground. They leave the moon, go back up to the command module. They get out of the upper stage of the lunar module. Then they shove it back down to the moon. It flies back into the moon and crashes. When that stage crashed into the moon the very first time, the moon rang like a bell for 3 hours. The moon is hollow, y'all. And who told us? NASA. That's the irony of it. So what happened as the flights went on to Apollo 12, 13 we didn't land, we went around, 14, 15, they put bigger hydroxine motors on the retro rockets so they could fire the rockets and pick up more speed and make a bigger impact. The other lunar seismographs were put out there, and at the very last one on Apollo 17, when we fired it back in, the moon rang for 3 days. Now, if somebody was living inside the moon, I'm sure they loved that. But The moon is so odd, y'all. I can get on a blackboard if I had one up here, and mathematically I can prove to you that the Earth is not big enough to capture a moon of that size and hold it. It just can't. The weight is not there. The what we call it, the specific gravity is not there. Also, the moon is locked in a tidal lock, which means it doesn't rotate. So we see just one side of it, and that's it. That's unusual. I'm not saying that somebody flew it here, but you can catch astrophysicists in something. I've done it before. It's fun to do.
There have been many people who have said they were taken to the moon in a craft, or they were shown that there was a hollow moon and that inside were all kinds of computers and monitors to keep an eye and an ear on our planet. And that when you talk with astronomers about the uniqueness of Earth's moon and the size of it and this whole question of whether it's hollow, the one thing that I've always been impressed by was the first time I realized if you go through the rest of our solar system, there is no other planet-moon system that is going to have eclipses of the sun and eclipses of the moon because of the perfect fit, as if that was also part of the setup of the hollow moon to watch and to give a drama on this planet that would somehow manipulate or influence humans. And that all comes up in the human abduction syndrome literature.
If you admit that there was once a more highly advanced civilization than ours today, on the moon or on Mars, and they built this face on Mars and this gigantic pentagonal pyramid and all this stuff, what do you guys think the first question you're going to get at the press conference is? What happened to them? And if the answer is, this planet right next to Mars exploded, people are going to go, wait a minute, planets can explode? I mean, do you really think that they want those kinds of questions? So that's the reason. It goes all the way back to the Brookings Report, where they talked about if you discover artifacts, you should seriously consider not telling anybody, which became the basis for 2001: A Space Odyssey, the film. It's pretty obvious that when you introduce something like that into the body politic and into the mindset of people, it could have disastrous consequences. Because guess what? Last time I checked, we live on a planet, and there are actually papers out there that talk about how you can have a natural nuclear chain reaction on a planet of sufficient size and mass, and the Earth qualifies, and the whole thing can just go boom for basically no reason. So if that's actually, now I don't know if that paper is rock solid, but it's a scientific paper that was out there that's been peer reviewed. And so you're basically saying to people, they were more advanced than us, but they got wiped out by something. And if it's not a natural disaster, what if the answer is there was a war? Oh, really? There's space wars, so there's aliens out. I mean, they don't want to answer any of those questions. So that's why it's critical to keep this a secret, or to let it out in a way that's very, very timed release, like timed release aspirin, little by little by little, so that it really doesn't affect people, because it could really cause calamitous circumstances in our civilization.
30 years ago. Now imagine how young y'all would be 30 years younger. I went to Beijing, China, and CSA called me, China Space Academy. And while I was there, it was kind of an exchange of ideas. And I don't know how I got started. I just got started and wouldn't stop. But I drew out on the blackboards an entire mining operation for a substance called helium-3. Helium-3 is an isotope that's made by the sun by the tremendous heat, thrown through the solar system by the solar winds nearly at the speed of light. Earth does not really get hardly any of it, called the Van Allen radiation belt and all the layers of atmosphere, but the moon has none of that, so it slams into the moon. Well, why is helium-3 so important? Well, you're about to learn why. I showed China how to build these droid Earth-moving robots, and you've seen Earth movers, you see how big they are. Well, you land one, soft impact it on the moon, the thing starts rolling across an area actually no bigger than this room would do. And it will go down about 12 inches, pull up the soil, crush everything into a hopper, put the hopper into the direct sunlight, heats the crushed material and rocks up, and then out comes this gas, and then the machine turns its back to the sun and puts that gas chamber into the shade, which is 250 degrees below zero. The gas turns into a liquid. That's liquid helium-3. You then fire it into these things like little rocket bullets. They fire off of the Earth mover, go up to orbit to a mothership, and you load them in like bullets in a cylinder. The cylinder then flies back to Earth, lands by parachute with an ablative heat shield, and there you've got liquid helium-3 in your hand. Well, what good would that be? What we found out from the 1,200 pounds of moon rock that we brought back, the University of Northwestern conducted experiments and they got hold of helium-3. We took the helium-3 and had this idea of what would happen if we put it into a pile rod of a fusion reactor. Well, we did. You know what happened? Efficiency shot up quadruple. And the half-life reduced itself by 50%. So suddenly we're getting clean fusion power from helium-3. And I thought that was kind of cool, and I left. What I didn't know the little boogers going to go. They're up on the moon right now, on the backside mining with my droids. So I don't care. I'm kind of glad they did it, but all I can tell them is move over because I'm coming. And I'm going to mine helium-3. That's an urgency to get back to the moon to get a helium-3 to add to our energy depleting resources on this planet. As far as I know right now, there's not an electromagnetic fusion containment engine in existence anywhere right now. The last one was in 1971. I know because I destroyed it. At Area 51 of all places. To understand the technology that's involved in such a device is enormous, and it's so handy if you apply it to our world energy needs. What I did in 1971, it took me, I first started designing it when I was 12 years old. So for 5 years, I worked on design. Then for 26 and a half months, we were under construction. And I had an army of people helping me, not just by myself. I had General Curtis LeMay as the project manager. And then we had Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Lawrence Livermore Laboratories. We had Los Alamos, Battelle Memorial, RAND, and go down the list as long as you arm. And we modularized all the work, so when people were doing the components, they knew that it went into some kind of propulsion device, but they didn't know what. And LeMay set that up, really smart, so you can't figure out what it was. When we got all the parts back, we did the final assembly at my lab, and we got it done. If you don't know what I'm talking about, and some of you look glazed over out there, I don't think you have a clue what it is I'm talking about. So let me explain to you in a simple term. I created a magnetic bottle, and inside that bottle I detonated deuterium and another substance for proprietary reasons I'm not going to tell you. But when I detonated, I had a hydrogen bomb explosion. I contained it. It stayed in the bottle. Now, don't be sitting there thinking, well, there's no material on Earth that could withstand a hydrogen explosion. You're absolutely right. There is nothing. It's what's holding it in place is magnetic fields. These magnetic fields that I've created, which took me from age 12 to 17 to get perfected, these fields are operating as a black hole does in space. And it's the configuration that I have it set up on. No containment project right now running today has the containment configuration that I have. They are running on tutorial compressors. Looks like a nautilus. You ever seen a nautilus cut in half, concentric circles? Well, that's what their designs are. they're never going to get fusion containment because that's only half the answer. You have to have two of them. And when you hook them together, the cyclotrons will then blend them into a figure eight. What's the figure eight turned sideways in math? Infinity, thank you. So, it's an old adage from an Oriental expression, let the dragon chase its own tail. So it's locked forever in this continuous infinity loop. And with that, I can tap on it through a plasma beam. I can open up an orifice, a hole in the field, and tap onto that power. And it's such enormous power. And I'm not, some people said, you're talking about cold fusion. No, this thing's not cold, y'all. Inside my magnetic bottle, it runs at 100 million degrees centigrade. That's 10,000 times hotter than the core of the sun. So it's extremely hot. That's why it would be so handy here on Earth. Can you imagine what I could do to Yucca Mountain? I could eat it. And there would be nothing left, not even radiation. Feed it into this thing, get energy out of it, and the material is gone forever. Imagine what I could do to the trash in the oceans. Eat it. No hydrocarbons, no atoms, nothing left. It's total annihilation at that pressure and temperature. So it's a perfect waste disposal energy system that you could use here on Earth. If you go to phase 2, 3, and 4 on it, you move it out in space where it's supposed to be. Never was supposed to be launched from the Earth to orbit. That's just our military wanting to speed up the process. But if you put this where it's supposed to be, what can I do for you? Well, I could answer Einstein's riddle. How can you go millions of times faster than the speed of light without breaking the speed of light and stay within Newtonian physics? That's what I was able to do. That's probably about as clear as mud to you, isn't it? Let me give you an example. You don't have a piece of paper over there, do you?
I do.
Okay. Now, right here is us, Milky Way galaxy. Over here is Andromeda galaxy. To get across this page at the speed of light at 186,000 miles a second, it would take you 200 million years to get across this page. Well, that's just not going to do, y'all. We don't live that long. So we're going to have to go a little bit faster. How much faster? About 1.5 million times faster. So what happens is with my engine, remember the magnetic bottles, the magnetic spheres? I don't have 5 hours to explain the details, but I can get an echo wave outside this chamber to go outside my spacecraft. Then my spacecraft becomes like what did I say it was operating like? A black hole. So my spacecraft will roll space around the spacecraft. And when it does, this is what I will do. At about 1/4 light speed, I will fly the width of this edge. I will jump through see how the barriers are touching each other? Those are transdimensional barriers. So what is happening, it's called transdimensional jump drive. And you'll go across this page at about 1/4 light speed. In about 5 to 8 minutes, your time, you turn the engine off, and now you're over here at Andromeda Galaxy. You went hundreds of millions of times faster than the speed of light without breaking the speed of light. I wonder what old Einstein would have thought of that. So anyhow, there was a movie called Event Horizon. Anybody ever see that? Well, Sam Neill did that demonstration. How did he do that demonstration? I wrote the script. That's where it came from.